Hi, I'm Sophie. And last night at dinner, my own brother tried to tear me apart in front of everyone. He called me useless, laughed at my life, and even ripped my grandmother's necklace from my neck. They thought I was powerless, a joke at my own table. But there's one thing they didn't see coming. The dining room smelled like rosemary and tension. Light from the overhead chandelier threw long, tired shadows across the table, catching on wine glasses that had been filled too early. Suburban Houston evenings always had that sticky warmth that clung to your skin, and tonight it mixed with the forced smiles and dry laughs of my family. I was the last to arrive, slipping through the door 15 minutes late, my hair still damp from the rain and my blouse wrinkled from the day's chaos at the nonprofit. No one said anything directly, but the sideways glances said enough. Always late, always underdressed, always Sophie. Carson had arranged this dinner, called it mandatory, as if we were still kids being herded by Dad. Now he sat at the head of the table like he'd earned it, elbows wide, voice louder than necessary. The family played their roles. Susan, my sister, smiled too hard. Brad, her husband, stayed glued to his phone under the table. My youngest brother, Nate, was halfway through his second glass of wine and hadn't made eye contact with anyone. I sank into my seat without a word. No one asked about my work, of course. I learned long ago not to expect that. The toast came fast. Carson stood up, glass in hand, all smug charm. "To family," he said, pausing for effect. "And to our dear Sophie, still holding down the fort in that creaky old house. The museum, as we like to call it." A few chuckles followed. Too loud, too rehearsed. Even Susan's mouth twitched before she caught herself. I smiled like I was supposed to. But inside, something cracked. He wasn't talking about the house. He was talking about me. They always did this, wrap their contempt in comedy, like cruelty was easier to swallow if it came with a laugh. Carson's words echoed louder than the clinking glasses. "Still clinging to that house like it means something," he'd said. "It does mean something. Everything." I took a small sip of wine. "A good thing the person who owns the house thinks it's worth clinging to," I said. Calm, quiet. Silence blanketed the table for a beat. Then someone cleared their throat. The conversation shifted, forced and forgettable. But I noticed Michelle, Carson's wife, looking at me a little too long. She wasn't laughing. In my purse, the folded paper felt heavier than usual. The deed, signed by our father before the cancer took his voice, and then the rest of him. It was mine, has been for years. No one had asked, and I never offered. I promised myself I'd never use it to hurt them. But promises break, especially when people treat silence like surrender. Carson talked on, like he always did, bragging about some real estate venture, hinting he might transform the old place into something useful, maybe a wine bar, give it some life. I felt it like a switch flipping in my chest. Not heat, not even anger, just clarity. They all assumed I was the quiet one, the helper. The spinster sister who clung to photos and dusty rooms. But they didn't know. I hadn't stayed quiet because I was weak. I stayed quiet because I was watching. I set my wine glass down, firmly enough that it caught Carson's eye. He didn't pause, but I felt the shift. Not in him, in me. I watched them talk over each other, each trying to be louder than the last. Susan laughed at something Nate said, even though it wasn't funny. Michelle rubbed her temples like she couldn't decide whether to speak or vanish. I remembered standing in that house during a storm, holding buckets under leaks. I remembered organizing Dad's prescriptions, driving Mom to appointments, paying the property tax when no one else would. I remembered cleaning out the attic alone while the rest of them argued over furniture, and still, they saw me as the one who had done nothing. Dad's words came back to me, uninvited but sharp as ever. It's not just wood and walls, it's who we were. Who we were. Not who they are now. Carson smirked again, lifting his glass like a crown. I didn't respond. I just reached under the table and let my fingers brush against the folded deed. Let them laugh. They won't be laughing long. I didn't change clothes when I got home, just kicked off my shoes by the door and stepped into the stillness like it might give me something I couldn't get at that table. The house was quiet in a way only old places know how to be. Wooden beams settling, pipes humming faintly behind walls. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything in return. I stood in the hallway for a long while, still hearing Carson's laughter ringing in my ears, but it didn't sting the same. Not anymore. The echoes lost their bite inside these walls, the ones I'd patched and painted and defended in silence for so long. I laid my hand on the doorframe, the same spot I used to measure myself against as a kid. They don't even remember what this house meant, I said aloud. No one to hear me, and yet I needed to say it. I walked upstairs, passing photos I never took down, each frame dusted weekly out of habit. My hand paused on the old brass handle of the bedroom drawer. Then I pulled. Inside the velvet-lined box sat the paper I'd touched maybe twice in all these years. The deed, folded neatly. My name, clear as day. It all came back. That afternoon in the study, just me and Dad, he was already tired in a way the doctors hadn't explained yet. Sitting in that cracked leather chair like he was carrying the weight of everyone's silence. "I need you to listen," he'd said, the tone so serious it pressed everything else flat. He slid the paper toward me. "You're the only one who remembers this house isn't a trophy. It's a promise. They'll treat it like property. You'll treat it like family." I told him I didn't want the responsibility. He just looked at me and said, "Then do it anyway. That's what family means sometimes." We never told the others. He didn't want drama. "This isn't about money, it's about memory," he said. Back in the present, I let my fingers trace the edge of the page. I had honored that silence for years. But now, I wasn't sure silence meant respect anymore. Maybe it just meant surrender. I never told anyone about the deed, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to be accused of manipulation, of playing dad. I kept quiet because peace, real or fake, was easier to manage than the fallout of truth. And maybe I just got used to being the one who held her tongue. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I don't remember when I first read those words, but they hung in my head like a fog tonight. This wasn't just about a house. It was about being seen, respected, remembered. A knock pulled me out of my thoughts. Sharp, hesitant. I tucked the deed back in the drawer and walked down slowly. When I opened the door, there she was, Marla, my cousin, and the only one in the family who had been more exiled than me. She looked older than I remembered, like life had kept swinging even when she stopped ducking. She held flowers wrapped in brown paper, no card. "I was driving through," she said, like that explained anything. I let her in without asking questions. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where Dad used to read the paper. "I kept your secret," she said, after a long silence. I didn't respond right away. "You were there," I said. She nodded. "He trusted you. They wouldn't have understood." "Do you think it's wrong?" I asked. "If I finally use it?" "Wrong?" She scoffed, gently. "No. Late? Maybe. But it's still right." When she left, I stood in the hallway again, looked around, took a breath, and started moving. Carson's high school football trophy still sat on the shelf in the living room, front and center like a shrine. I picked it up, felt the dust on my fingers, and placed it in the bottom drawer of the old hutch. Then I put up a picture of Dad in his garden. Muddy knees, big smile. That's who the house belonged to. I moved through each room. Opened a curtain in the guest bedroom that hadn't seen daylight in years. Sunlight poured in like it had been waiting. "You wanted a war, Carson," I whispered. "I just wanted peace. But maybe it's time I stop hoping." That night, I sat on the front porch as the sky turned that deep Texas blue, the kind that makes you feel like anything unsaid might finally be safe to speak. I pulled out a notebook. On the cover, I wrote, "For when they come back." First, I scanned the deed and emailed it to myself with password encryption. Then I taped the lawyer's number, Dad's old friend, back under the kitchen phone. Lastly, I circled tomorrow's date to visit the town archives. No panic, no fury, just movement. The house was quiet again. But this time, It wasn't silence. It was strategy in disguise. I woke up before the sun did. Eyes open, heart racing, breath caught somewhere between anger and dread. I hadn't even dreamed, just stared at the ceiling for hours until the ceiling stared back. I pulled the covers off and moved through the house barefoot, still in the same clothes. I tried to distract myself, wiped down the counters, watered the plants, straightened a photo that didn't need straightening. But everything I touched reminded me of something I used to ignore. Every creak in the wood, every whisper in the vents, they didn't feel familiar anymore. They felt like warnings. Sometimes, the quietest rooms hold the loudest secrets. That line played in my mind like a broken record. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. Mostly photos of kids, barbecue updates, memes only they found funny. I never said much in there, but I watched. Today, something felt off. Too much chatter without a trace of me in it. Curiosity nudged me harder than usual. I dug deeper, clicking on the little info icon, scrolling until I noticed a second thread, a name I didn't recognize, not mine, but Carson's number linked to it. Something in me clicked. I opened my laptop, linked my cloud backups, found a file Carson once accidentally shared when we were trying to schedule Mom's old checkups. It gave me just enough access to pull deleted threads. And there it was, a side chat. Carson, Jenna, Aunt Dolores, talking like I didn't exist. "Make it clean," Carson wrote. "We just need to get her to agree to move out. Quietly." "She's stubborn," Jenna added, "but we've got the paperwork already moving." "She doesn't need to know we've already got a buyer." The words were surgical, cold, efficient. I just stared, hands trembling, not from fear, but from something older than that, betrayal, like watching a fire spread in a home you built with your bare hands. I screenshotted everything, every line, every timestamp. I wasn't about to ask them why. I already knew. They'd grown tired of pretending to tolerate me, and now they wanted to erase me. By late afternoon, I tried to breathe some fresh air into my lungs, stepped out to check the mailbox, the sky already turning to its golden hour. That's when I saw it. Carson's car, parked 2 houses down like he was hiding in plain sight. I followed instinct, not logic. Walked around back, past the hedges Dad planted, to the old oak tree that always gave us shade and secrets. That's when I heard them. Carson's voice, clear, cocky. "We'll force her out. If she doesn't agree, we'll say she's mentally unfit." Then Jenna, laughing lightly. "She always was a little too quiet, right? Makes her look unstable." I didn't move. My hands gripped the bark like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The voices kept going. Paperwork, signatures, timelines. I stepped back slowly. I didn't want them to know I'd heard. Not yet. Not until I was ready to do something with it. Back inside, I didn't cry like in the movies. No screaming, no slamming drawers, just silence. I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, and let the tears come the way rain does, without permission. All the loyalty I'd given Carson, every secret I'd kept for Jenna, every holiday I hosted without asking for thanks. And now, this. "If they see me as fragile, it's because I let them," I whispered. I stood up and began washing a mug I didn't even need, again and again, until it slipped from my hand and hit the sink. Hard. It shattered into 3 clean pieces. I didn't clean it up. I left it there, like a warning. That night, I sat at my desk, the same one Dad had once used to sort bills, write letters, plan futures. I opened my laptop, emails, screenshots, voice memos, every message copied, labeled. I updated the scanned deeds metadata and emailed copies to Marla and the attorney. I knew what I was doing wasn't just defensive, it was preparation. I clicked Save As and typed Evidence/01. "They wanted a victim," I whispered. I gave them silence. That ends now. Later, my phone buzzed. A message from Carson. "Hey Soph, we're stopping by tomorrow to chat. Cool?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the curtains in the living room, let the breeze in, set 2 coffee cups on the table, one for me and one for the truth. They'd come expecting the old me. They'd find someone else entirely. The night felt thicker than usual. I'd lain awake, listening. At first I thought it was the HVAC, or maybe the old pipes shifting. But when footsteps echoed on the porch, soft, deliberate, I felt every muscle in me tighten. I crept to the window. A car idled under the streetlight, tinted windows, license plate unreadable, someone watching. My heartbeat thudded like a warning drum. I whispered to myself, even walls have ears. I used to murmur that to these walls when I was a child, hoping they'd protect me. Now I felt them listening. I pulled open my laptop, reviewed those screenshots, the messages, the evidence I was collecting. The feeling that someone was listening didn't feel like paranoia anymore. It felt like a warning shot. That afternoon, Carson called for a family meeting in the living room. He invited a real estate developer. Everyone gathered: Mom, Susan, Jenna, Dolores. I stayed quiet, watching him take center stage. He announced with a practiced smile, "We might sell this house after all, convert it to high-end condos." He said it like it was inevitable. Some nodded. Others frowned. The room tilted under that phrase. He added, "Not everyone has sentimental ties. Business is business." That line felt like a blade. Quietly, inside, I felt something solidify. They spoke as if the walls never spoke to me. During lunch, Aunt Dolores leaned toward a guest and said, "Wasn't Sophie supposed to inherit that house?" The question dropped like ice, eyes flicked. Carson's lips curved. He answered, "Oh, that was sentimental talk. She never held the documents." The room was suddenly too small. My chest tightened. In my mind, they always reduced me, from air to rumor. I swallowed tension. "Actually, I do." I said it as evenly as I could. Pause. Anyone could hear disbelief in their own silence. I stood, moved across the table. The shift surprised them. I laid down my documents, deed, chat logs, screenshots. Carson's expression tightened. Jenna rose. No one interrupted. My voice stayed soft, firm. "You chose this position. Now I claim mine." I asked for a recess, time to fetch more proof. The room didn't break. It held its breath. When everyone broke away, I retreated to Dad's old study, the place he used to ponder decisions, sketch plans. I touched his chair, imagined his voice. "You always did what others refused to see." My fingers found his journal, in Dad's handwriting. "Sophie understands what legacy means." Quiet tears came. I let them. Then I wiped my face and squared my shoulders for the fight ahead. Later, my phone pinged. I opened an email. Attached, a scanned map of our property, boundaries altered, lines redrawn. The file name, futureplans.pdf. My pulse slammed. The message at the bottom, "When the time is right, sign or step aside." I woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling while the shadows of the blinds cut across my face. My body felt as if it had been bracing all night, jaw clenched, hands still curled. Yesterday's cafe scene kept replaying in my head, Jenna's eyes flickering, that strange half-smile when I answered Dolores. The house was quiet, but not a kind of quiet you rest in. It pressed in on me, listening. Betrayal tastes bitterest in familiar corridors. I whispered to myself as I buttoned a plain shirt, smoothed my hair, and forced myself toward the brunch my mother had asked for. Low-key, she'd called it. Nothing about it felt low-key. The cafe smelled of coffee and sugar when I walked in. Nadine sat near the window, her hands around a mug she hadn't drunk. Carson arrived next, his handshake too loud. Jenna trailed in, eyes darting. Aunt Dolores drifted over last with that soft perfume and her small laugh, the one she always used before she dropped a hard question. We made small talk for a while. Then Dolores tilted her head and asked, "When will that house finally belong to someone?" Her voice landed like a blade under the table. Conversation stopped. Carson didn't miss a beat. "Oh, we're just deciding whether to split the proceeds or reassign ownership," he said, breezy, as if it meant nothing. My pulse picked up. Their civility was a performance. I leaned in slightly, voice calm but clear. "Which ownership? Whose name?" Eyes flicked. Carson's jaw shifted. Jenna smoothed her napkin until it folded like paper. Nadine stared at her mug. The silence said more than words. I watched my mother's face. Not shock, not defense, just stillness. A flashback cut through me. Me at 12. Carson mocking my handwriting at dinner. Dad out of town. Me looking to her for help. Her eyes trembling, but her mouth staying shut. That same silence was here now, decades later, drinking tea. Nadine forced a small, brittle smile at nothing. She didn't speak up. She never had. That silence was softer than Carson's words, but it cut deeper. Mother, your silence spoke louder than his voice, I thought, but held it back. I pushed my chair back slowly. Excuse me, I said. Before leaving, I bent closer to Nadine, low enough for only her to hear. You know what you're doing, that laugh you held back. My voice wasn't sharp, but it carried. She blinked and looked away. Carson shifted. Jenna stared at the floor. I walked out without raising my voice. Back home, I shut the study door and set my bag down like a ritual. The desk was already covered with papers, deed, screenshots, notes. I started mapping out my next moves like a general. Trust options, title history, notarized copies. I dialed Elijah, Dad's old attorney. It's Sophie, I said on his voicemail. I need to meet. Quietly. Then I uploaded another backup of the deed to the cloud, added timestamps, encrypted a copy, slid the flash drive into a hidden folder. They wanted me out of sight. I'll turn every shadow into evidence. My hands steadied as I worked. By evening, the sky had dimmed. I was labeling folders when a flicker of movement caught my eye through the back window. I stepped quietly onto the porch. The night smelled of damp grass and something metallic. Near the hedge, a figure stood. Trina, my younger cousin, not supposed to be here. Her phone screen glowed blue against her face. I could see the title at the top. Proposed remodel. Lot B. My lot. My house. She looked up, startled to see me. I didn't speak. The porch light threw my shadow long across the lawn. You'll tell me your plans in my house first, I thought. We stood like that, the night between us, the scent of betrayal hanging like smoke. I woke before sunrise again, the room dim and still. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed it, the smell of grass on Trina's coat, the glow of her phone in my yard. But when I swung my legs off the bed, something felt wrong. The notebook on my desk wasn't where I'd left it. Pages bent, a pen rolled just out of reach. I crossed the room slowly, pulse quickening. This wasn't a misplaced object. Someone had been in my study. I opened the notebook and turned to the entries I'd marked never to be shared. The ink looked smeared in places, lines faintly erased. I touched the paper and felt a tremor go through me. They touched my words. They touched my truth. By mid-morning, I found Marla in the kitchen. She was rinsing mugs, eyes a little too wide when she saw me. Did you go into my study last night? I asked quietly. She shook her head but hesitated. Finally, she blurted, I saw Nadine there. I thought she was just looking for an address. I didn't think... Her voice trailed off. And my hands went cold. That journal held everything. My notes on the taxes I'd paid with my own salary, the sacrifices no one had acknowledged, my legal claim to the deed, all of it in my handwriting, all of it now rifled through. Marla twisted a towel in her hands. I didn't say anything. I figured you'd given her permission. She looked down. I stared at her and felt the betrayal roll through me, slow and heavy. Not just Carson, not just Nadine. Everyone. I drew a measured breath, forced my voice to stay even. Thank you for telling me. Then I turned and walked out before she could speak again. At noon, I stood at a charity luncheon Carson had arranged. Round tables, linen napkins, name tags. He was in his element, shaking hands, patting backs. I stood at the edge, holding a glass of water. When the speeches ended, he grinned at the small crowd. She's good with books, he said, gesturing toward me. But when it comes to real money, she's always been a dreamer. Laughter rippled. Cameras flashed. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were new, but because they were public. He belittles me in public so he can erase me in private, I thought. I held my face still, eyes on the stem of my glass. People would call my silence gracious. They wouldn't see the fire under it. That evening, I met Elijah in his office. Papers spread between us like a quiet war. I handed over a stack of evidence, deed copies, screenshots, notes from my father's journal. He read quickly, jaw tight. "We'll need to subpoena emails," he said. "Get property records, maybe a third-party audit. Carson will fight back. Power, influence, public smear." I nodded. I didn't come this far to let shadows win. We built a plan there under the muted glow of his desk lamp, the quiet punctuated by the scratch of his pen. When I came home, I didn't wait. I walked straight into the living room where Nadine sat. "Why did you go through my journal?" I asked. She flinched. "I thought I was doing what was best for our family," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "Family?" I answered. "Family protects each other's privacy. Family doesn't use silence as a weapon." Her mouth opened, closed. "Sophie," she started, but I was already turning away. I heard her call my name as I walked down the hall. I didn't stop. That conversation cracked something that had been holding me back for years. Later, the garden was cool and damp under my shoes. I walked along the path, trying to slow my breathing. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered. A low voice said, "You have until tomorrow noon to sign over that property, or we publish everything." The line went dead before I could speak. I stood there with the phone in my hand, the night pressing close. The line between private and public had shattered. The war wasn't in quiet rooms anymore. It was here, in the open. I woke to an early message from Elijah. "Meeting scheduled today. Be prepared." My phone felt heavier than usual when I read it. I poured a cup of coffee and moved through the living room slowly, eyes scanning the walls, every corner feeling different. Then I stopped. Jenna's painting hung in full view, framed and bold. That canvas used to be mine, hidden, tucked away, now rebranded as hers. My heart tightened. I recalled the night I sneaked that painting out of storage, the hours I spent restoring it. They think art is softness. They forgot it holds truth. I set the mug down carefully, squared my shoulders, and left the house with all the quiet intention of someone walking into a storm. At the luncheon held in our town's gallery, local patrons gathered in crisp shirts and dresses. Carson rose to introduce me. He did it casually. "She studied art." "Cute," he said in front of donors. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The room stilled. Donors exchanged glances. I cleared my throat softly and said, "Art understands more than money ever will." A few eyebrows arched, murmurs stirred. Naomi, a patron known for her eye in local art circles, nodded subtly. I felt a crack in the wall that had kept me invisible for so long. Then came the moment they planned. The gallery doors swung open, and there it was, the hidden painting I once claimed. It stood framed with an inscription, "Holden's name." The crowd gasped. I moved forward, pulled my phone from my pocket, and held up an image of the original version, with my signature at the bottom corner. The curator's eyes widened. Carson's face drained of color. In a low voice, I said, "They edited my past to erase my presence." I followed him down a side corridor. Guests drifted behind, curious. I blocked his path. "Why lie? Why pretend you own what you never earned?" I demanded. He pressed his lips. "You never asked," he said. I stepped in close. Because I was told my silence was safer. Then I turned and walked past him. Guests watched. Some murmured. This was not a family spat anymore. It was a public reckoning. From behind, Naomi's voice cut through the tension. "I believe her. I want the original back as an exhibit." A few others nodded. An older collector said, "Art can't lie." They murmured agreement. I felt warmth in that circle of support, strangers becoming witnesses. My voice steadied. Truth surfaces, even after lies. I offered a small nod of thanks. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. A message glared against the screen. "You will be sued tomorrow for defamation." Beneath it, "Defamation suit filed. Damages, $500,000. The letters swirled in front of me. I gripped the phone so hard it hurt. My resolve hardened. Let's see who has more proof. I walked into the hall that night knowing every eye would find me. The invitation called it a family celebration, but the air smelled of calculation. Old friends, neighbors, donors, all of them gathered under chandeliers. Carson stood near the head of the long table, champagne raised. "To family unity," he said, his gaze brushing me like a blade. I placed my hands flat on the table and stood. My face was calm, but my pulse beat at my throat. Tonight, I am not part of their show. I am the one setting the stage. My voice cut through his toast like a quiet knife. "Before we celebrate unity," I said, "shouldn't we be clear on who truly owns the house?" Murmurs rolled down the table. Carson's smile twitched. As I spoke, I heard a whisper behind me. Trina leaning to a guest. "She's always chasing identity. That's her problem." The guest, half drunk, repeated it aloud as if it were commentary. A hush fell. I felt the sting, but I didn't blink. "I chased nothing," I said steadily, turning toward Trina. "I held what's mine." The words landed harder than I expected. The murmurs shifted. Some gasped, others nodded. The remark that was meant to belittle me became a line drawn in the room. My voice rose just enough. "And I won't apologize for it." Carson's jaw tightened. He gestured to a servant. "Bring the necklace," he said. My stomach dropped. The heirloom necklace, my grandmother's, had been in my care for years, a promise made at her deathbed. The servant placed it in Carson's hand. "For show," he said, then looped it around his own neck like a trophy. Guests leaned forward, whispering. I felt heat rise from my chest. That necklace was more than metal. It was lineage, memory, trust. I forced a small smile, but my voice stayed steady. "That necklace never belonged to you," I said. "It was held in trust, by me." The flame inside me roared. I stepped toward him, stopping at arm's length. "Why lie? Why pretend you own what you never earned?" I asked, not raising my voice but sharpening it. He shot back, "You manipulate family secrets to make yourself look righteous." I reached into my bag and laid documents on the table. Receipts, emails, deeds. "I held this house in silence," I said. "You threatened me in noise. Let the evidence speak now." Heads turned. Donors whispered. Some leaned forward to read. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the witness, and the evidence was my shield. Nadine sat between us, her hands knotted in her lap. The room grew still. I looked at her. "Mother, would you rather loyalty or comfort?" Her eyes glistened. She swallowed, glancing from me to Carson. Finally, she spoke, voice trembling but clear. "I see you now, Sophie." The room shifted. Conversations stilled. I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders, not victory, but a crack in the old walls. Dinner limped toward its end. Carson stood, voice cold as steel. "You have 24 hours to accept our terms," he said, "or I file the lawsuit at dawn." I met his eyes, not moving. I pulled my phone from my pocket and whispered into it, "Start the counter." Then I set it down. They wanted a meek surrender. They'll get a reckoning instead. I woke up before the sun. The house was still, like it had been holding its breath all night. I walked down the hallway barefoot. The floor didn't creak this time. My fingers grazed along the old photographs on the wall, ones that used to remind me where I didn't belong. They felt different now, not because the faces changed, but because I had. I stepped into the dining room. The chairs were still pushed back from the night before. I stood in the spot where Carson had made his final threat. Same floor, same walls. But something in me had shifted. In the corner drawer was a stack of letters I hadn't touched in years. I opened them quietly, knowing whose handwriting I'd see. The paper was soft from age. Nadine's words, written decades ago, trembled with a kind of pain I hadn't expected. "I knew the deed was yours," she wrote, "but you were still a child. And if I'd spoken then, your brother would have torn us apart." My fingers trembled. Not from anger this time, but something deeper. You were the only one I trusted to remain whole. I sat back slowly, holding the letter to my chest. All this time, I thought she'd abandoned me out of shame, but it was something else, something harder to face, protection. Her silence wasn't absence, it was armor. For me, I whispered to the room, not all love is loud. Sometimes it whispers in the cracks. Later that morning, I heard the soft thump of drawers opening upstairs. Carson was packing. I didn't go to him, didn't watch. I let the steps speak for themselves. A bag zipped, a door shut. The only thing he left behind was a small box on the kitchen table. I opened it slowly. Inside was the necklace and a sticky note. You wore it better. No apology, just truth, plain and soft. I didn't cry, didn't chase. I let him go, fully, finally, not as a win, as a release. Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook, it's cutting the hook out of your own skin. Over the next few weeks, I started making the house mine again, not just on paper, with my hands. I peeled off the dated wallpaper in the hallway, repainted the den in a soft sage green, took down curtains that smelled like dust and memory, but not everything got erased. The scribbles on the pantry wall, my name written in crayon when I was 7, they stayed. Some stories deserve to linger. I had the deed framed, but I didn't hang it in a vault or lock it in a drawer. I put it on the bookshelf next to the cookbooks and old photo albums. Visible, normal. The center of the living room now held a new photo. Me, alone, smiling, coffee in hand. I didn't pose. I just lived. I live here, I said aloud one afternoon, standing in the doorway. Fully, loudly, without apology. That Sunday, Nadine came over for brunch. First time in years. We didn't talk about the past at first, just waffles, syrup, too much butter. We bickered about how crispy the bacon should be. Laughed like old friends, like people who knew what it meant to hurt and still show up. As she poured another cup of coffee, I brought up the letters. She didn't flinch, just looked at me and said, "It was always your house, Sophie. I was just keeping it warm." We didn't need to cry. We didn't need to hug long and hard. We just sat there, together. That was enough. The past hadn't vanished, but it had been rewritten, with truth. I felt light, not because everything was fixed, but because it was real. That evening, I stood at the front door, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The light hit just right, soft, not dramatic, the kind that says, "You made it." I looked at the deed above the bookshelf, no longer a secret, a statement, my statement. He mocked my family, I whispered. But this family, this legacy, was always mine to define. Some people inherit houses, others inherit fire. I got both, and I used them well.